All right, Shabbos, say good morning. Let's begin. So a lot to do today. Another beautiful daf of Gemara. So we are picking up daf Beis Amud Beis. We are picking up 2, 4, 6, 8 lines up from the bottom. So Amar Rav Chanina Misura. Rav Chanina of Surah said the following: Lo lema inish le'isasei bizman hazeh, lo tistri v'hadi ploni. A man should not say to his wife today, in these days, that she should not be alone with a particular man. Why? Dilma Karmelan Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Huda da Amar Kinu Api Atzmo. Because most remember yesterday we quoted 3 different shitos, 2 shitos in the Mishnah of Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua, and a third Mishnah of Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Huda. And Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Huda was novel in that he said we could affect that kinui could be affected. The warning could be affected even through an Eid Echad. So Rabbi Chanina makes a very interesting statement. Rabbi Chanina says that today a man should not go ahead and warn his wife, should not go ahead and issue a kinui in front of an Eid Echad. Why? Lest we paskin like Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda, and it turns out that if he warns her in front of an Eid Echad and she violates the warning and is alone with the man, it turns out that what? She becomes asura. She becomes prohibited. And what's the problem? And therefore today there is no sotah process. There are no waters of sotah to be able to check her. And he will accidentally prohibit his wife to himself forever. Because most of the idea is that if a woman goes ahead and has a warning, violates the warning, technically speaking, she is asura to her husband until she goes through the process of the mesotah. So again, Rabbi Chanina is going ahead and raising this issue that in the event that halacha follows Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda, a man should not warn his wife contemporarily, lest she violate the warning, and it turns out that she's asura to him forever. Amrei Shlakish. So we'll say now a little bit of an etymological discussion. So Reish Lakish says, what does kinui mean? What does that word actually mean? To which the Gemara answers, to which Reish Lakish answers, Davra hamatel kina beino lebeino. It refers to something that creates animosity, beino lebein acherim, something that creates animosity between the woman and others. Now what does that mean? Alma kasaver kinui api atzmo. Rather, it must be that what he holds is that kinui, a warning, could take place again just between the woman and her husband. Therefore, v'kuli amalo yadi dikanila, and therefore other people will not know that the husband is warning the wife. Va'amri ma dekama dekabadla va'asile me'avet kina bahada. So we'll say, so remember, according to this opinion, you could say that a husband has the ability to go ahead and issue a kinui and issue a warning, so no one else knows about it. So suddenly, what happens? Well, we would assume that after a woman has received this kinui, this warning from her husband, she probably generally recedes back, she pulls back from social interactions. So people see this and they say, what's going on over here? She's suddenly become antisocial, not understanding the reason for a social withdrawal, and it causes, again, some level of animosity between her and the people around her. So no, others say that kinui means something that causes animosity, not between the wife and others, but rather between husband and wife. Alma kasavar, according to this opinion, he must hold kinui api shnayim. That kinui must take place in front of 2 witnesses. V'kule alma yadi dekanila. Everyone knows that Lamaisa, the husband warned her, because remember, once something is happening in the presence of 2 witnesses, then it becomes a matter of public record. Therefore, again, no one is going to be upset or breakers with her when she socially withdraws, because they'll understand that she's trying not to violate the warning. The animosity will come about how? The animosity will come about as a result of the friction between her and her husband. So the Gemara says, Alma, top of Gimel, Alma kasavri Asra lekanos. Therefore, again, we see from here that what? That Lamaisa, one should not warn his wife. Let's take a look at Rashi. Rashi says, Kevan da Amri Lashon Hatalas Kinohu Alma Asr. And here's what's interesting. The common denominator between both of these shitos is that the word kinui, which we've been translating as warning this entire time, these opinions really mean Lashon of kina, of animosity. And therefore, again, the Torah itself and the Mishnah itself is trying to teach us that lo zu haderech, this is not really the right way to deal with this situation, because as we mentioned already yesterday, one way or another this is not going to end well, because the friction that this creates within the marriage probably creates a certain level of irreversible damage for the couple. Therefore, again, according to this approach, that kinui is from lashon of kina, lashon of animosity, it is better for a husband not to warn his wife. Again, if there are such marital issues, either try to work them out, and if they're not workable, then unfortunately, sometimes the marriage has to end in dissolution. Umand amar mutar lakanos mahu lashon kinui. Rabbi said the mandam who says that it is permitted for a husband to warn his wife about being alone with a particular man in a situation where he suspects adultery. So what's the lashon of kinui? Amrav Nachman bar Yitzchak, ein kinui ela lashon hasra. Kinui is a lashon of hasra, a lashon of warning. V'cheinu Omer, so too the pasuk says, V'aykane Hashem la'artzo. The pasuk in Yoel says, the Ribono Shel Olam warned his land. And therefore, again, kinui doesn't have to mean lashon kina, but rather kinui just simply means a warning. Tanya, Hayir Rabbi Meir Omer, both says an amazing Gemara. But I have to tell you we're going to see some beautiful Agarata today. I have to just give you the disclaimer. Throughout this Masechta, I will not have the opportunity, maybe I have some opportunities, but at least on a day-to-day, to really expound on the Agarata the way it deserves to be expounded on. I would urge you to do homework on this. There's a beautiful sefer I'll recommend from Masechta Sotah called Alev Radim. Alev Radim, I forgot the name of the author, but incredible sefer on Masechta Sotah, which really goes into specifically explaining the Agarata. Alev Radim. I'll email it out to the shir. So Tanya, for just $25.99. So the Gemara says, Tanya, Hayir Rabbi Meir Omer, Adam over Avera b'Seiser. Listen to this. A person violates an Avera in private, that Kodesh Baruch Hu machriz alav begalui, and the Ribono Shel Olam will announce it in public. Shne'emar, where do we see this from? Va'avar alav ruach kino, that the Ribono Shel Olam will cause to pass over the husband the spirit of jealousy. Ve'ein Avera ela lashon hachraza, and the lashon of Avera is a lashon of announcing. Shne'emar va'itzav Moshe va'yaviru kol b'machane. But say, take a look at Rashi for just a moment. Adam over Avera, kigon isha prutza overes b'seiser, like a woman who has committed adultery, again quietly. V'HaKadosh Baruch Hu machriz begalui, shenosin b'leiv baila lekanos la v'adavar misparsim begalui. The Gemara is saying over here that the lashon of the pasuk is va'avar alav ruach kina. So the Gemara is understanding that to mean that for some reason the husband has this suspicion. Now again, Pasha Pshat is he sees things that are just strange. The way the Gemara is understanding it over here is, it's almost like HaKadosh Baruch Hu intervenes, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu makes sure that the sin itself comes to the surface, which both says an incredible yisod, because what the Gemara is saying is, at the end of the day, everything comes out. At the end of the day, everything comes out. So sometimes we do things in life because we think ultimately that they could be kept quiet, or they could be kept under wraps. And sometimes they do, but more often than not, even the things we do b'seiser ultimately come out in public. And therefore, a person, we should always be very meticulous with what we do. Never, the Klal Gadol is, never do something in your private life that you wouldn't want to become part of public record. Incredibly, a very difficult way to live, but l'maisa, again, a very important way. Reish Lakish Amar, ein adam over avera, ela imki nichnas bo ruach shtus. Plus, it's an incredible Gemara. So Abai, I also urge you, if you're using your own Gemara, you should underline some of these Gemaras, fold over your page, because these are beautiful Gemaras to come back and reference. So Lakish says, a person doesn't commit a sin unless, of course, a ruach shtus, a spirit of foolishness, enters into him. Shne'emar ish ish. The pasuk says, when a man will go ahead and ish. I'm sorry, where am I over here? Shne'emar, I'm sorry. Ish ish ki tiste ishto. The Gemara says tishte ksiv. So the lashon is tiste, but again it can be vocalized as tishte from lashon shtus. We'll say it's an incredible yisod as well, which is that, the mashal the Maharal gives and others give, is if a person takes out a piece of paper and puts I want to commit a particular avera, and makes a pros con and a pros list and a cons list. So which side will always win? Always win. Okay, all right, good answer. Hey, so again, let me explain this. All right, so the cons side always wins. Always wins, right? Meaning, because you can always say, no matter what you're going to get from an avera, and sometimes you can get a lot of wonderful pleasures from an avera, it's always fleeting, it's always temporal, and it's always finite. There's no such thing as infinite pleasure from sin. The repercussions and ramifications of chait could be eternal. Literally, and that's not hyperbole. Could be. Thank you. Could go ahead and could be eternal. And I will say it's an incredible yisod. So if that's the case, so why do we sin? So here the Gemara is saying, the Rish Lakish is saying, there's a ruach shtus. It's silliness. It literally is spiritual temporary insanity. A person just loses their bearings just for those moments and is not thinking clearly. So the Gemara says, Ksiv, I'm sorry, Tara Devei Ishmael, Mipnei Maha, I mean the Torah Eid Echad B'Sotah. It's supposed to say now, the Gemara is also going to go back and forth between Agadata and between Halacha. So watch this. So Tara Devei Ishmael says, why is it that the Torah believed in Eid Echad by Sotah? Sorry, lost the microphone here. So why is it that the Torah believed? So why is it that the Torah believed in Eid Echad by Sotah? Sheraglayim Ludover. Because remember, this Torah the Eid Echad by Tumah. Remember, so why isn't Eid Echad believed by Tumah? Because there's Raglayim Ludover. There's circumstantial evidence. There was a kinui. There was a warning. Meaning, beforehand, to reach the level of warning means that the husband must suspect something. Then there was warning. Then there was violation of the warning. And therefore, if there's an Eid Echad that sees that she literally engages in adultery, ultimately the Eid Echad is believed. So the Gemara says, Shaglayim Ludover, Shari Kinala, he warned her. Vinistra, she was alone with the man. The Eid Echad Midashi Tmeah. And the Eid Echad testifies that ultimately, again, she has become Timeya. So the Gemara says, therefore, again, Eid Echad is believed by Tumah. Here's the problem. Well, so we already picked up on this yesterday, which is in the order of the Psukim. So Kinui, the warning, is written after stira and tuma, right? After seclusion and after potential defilement. So Amarlei va'avar. Ukivar avar. No, because the lashon of va'avar alav ruach kina is a lashon of, and it had already passed over him, or a spirit of jealousy, or a spirit of anger had already passed over him previously. That even though, again, the kinui itself is written after the Torah discusses Tuma and Stira, but the lashon of Va'ava refers to a process that occurred earlier on. Elame'ata, but if that's the case, Va'avar lachem kol chalutz, when the pasuk says, well, so this is talking about Bnei Gad and Bnei Ruvain, when they want to go ahead and settle in the Transjordanian lands, and Moshe Rabbeinu says, fine, but you have to go and fight the war for kibush, for the conquering of Eretz Yisrael. So Moshe Rabbeinu says, Va'avar lachem kol chalutz, and all of your soldiers, all of your armed men will go before the people. So does Va'avar mean already here also, that they already went to war? That's impossible. It didn't happen yet. Hachanami, Hasam Yidichsev, V'nichbesha ha'aretz lifnei Hashem, Va'achar tashuvu mashma de lahaba. No, so the Gemara essentially answers, is there from context we understand that since Moshe Rabbeinu says the land will be conquered from before HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and then you will go ahead and return to your homes, mashma de lahaba. We understand that va'avar in that context means something that will occur later on. Elahacha, but over here, if you think that it's as it's written, namely that kinui is coming after these other processes, the avar basar tuma ustira kinui lamali. I will say if there's already been stira, if there's already been seclusion, and there's already been tuma, there's Eid Echad testifying that she literally committed adultery. So what would be the purpose of the warning? Therefore, again, it must be that the avar in this context refers to what? A process that had already occurred before. So even though kinui is written in the Torah after stira in Tumah, the lashon of va'avar means this kinui is something that took place at the beginning of this process. Tana Dvei Rabbi Shmuel, Ein adam mekana leishto, ela imkein nichnasa bo ruach. So Tana Dvei Rabbi Shmuel says, a man only warns his wife if a spirit entered into him. Now, if you look at Rashi, so Rashi says over here, nichnasa bo ruach mimarom, a spirit from above. So now the shaila is going to be, what's the nature of the spirit? To which the pasuk says, Shneimar va'avar alav ruach kina v'kines ishto. So what Talmud Yishmael is picking up on is this lashon of va'avar alav ruach. What does that mean? What a strange statement. So Talmud Yishmael is saying it must be that there's a spirit from above that rests upon the person that causes him to suspect his wife of this behavior. So what's the nature of my ruach? What's the nature of this ruach? Rabbanan amri ruach tuma. So the rabbis say ultimately again that this refers to a spirit of impurity. In other words, we'll say that this is something negative in the husband that he suspects this kind of behavior in his wife. Rav Ashi Amar Ruach Tara. So this is very interesting. So Rav Ashi says, no, it's Ruach Tara. That what happens? That there's a spirit of purity that rests upon the husband that causes him to despise the perceived immorality that he sees within his wife and within his home. And it's that almost like that righteous indignation that causes him to trigger this process. Or Ruach Tara. It must be that Ruach in this context means a Ruach Tara. Why? Because the pasuk says, "Vikine is ishto rishus." Dir Rabbi Yishmael. So the pasuk says that if a man suspects va'avar alav ruach kina, vikine is ishto. So interestingly enough, Rabbi Yishmael says rishus. Rishus means that it's the husband's right to begin this process of sotah. But what? It's not an obligation. Right? It's his right, but it's not an obligation. Rabbi Akiva says chova. Rabbi Akiva says, no, it's actually an obligation. Rabbi Akiva says that if a husband suspects something, va'avra alav ruach kina, it is the husband's obligation. It is a chov for him to begin this process of sotah. So the Gemara says, ruach ta'ara shapir. So if you want to say that ruach in this context means a spirit of righteousness and purity, then the machlokis makes sense. Because, one's saying the spirit of impurity passed over you, so again Rabbi Shmuel will say, Rav Ashi will, Rabbi Shmuel will say, you can if you want to. Rabbi Kiva will say, you must. Elei amrit ruach toma, reshus v'chova, Elei amrit ruach toma, reshus v'chova, le'iluye le'inish ruach toma benafshe. But if you say that it's a spirit of impurity, does it make sense that we would tell a person to act on a spirit of impurity? Therefore, the Maaseh again, the Gemara suggests that ruach in this case must mean over here what? Must mean over here that there's a spirit of purity that rests upon the person that's causing him to trigger this process. But just so you see, by the way, it's interesting that you see the tension already in Sotah, right? You see this tension. Is the husband's suspicion based on the fact that what? That he's so righteous that he can't tolerate any level of impurity within his household? Or is it based on the fact that he himself is morally corrupt, and therefore, again, when you're immoral, you see immorality all around you? It's interesting how in the two last Masechtos we're learning, we see this tension. Same thing by Nazir. Is Nazir the actualization of a pure desire ultimately to become holy? Or is it good intentions but absolutely wrong direction? See, you see how sometimes when it comes to matters of acute holiness, the path is not necessarily clear, and that's the tension you even see in the Pesukim. So Gufa, the Gemara raised the kasha. So also remember, the Gemara just quoted machlokas between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shmuel. So now the Gemara is going to say Gufa. Vikines ishto rishus de Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Akiva Omer Chova. So now the Gemara is going to quote a number of machlokas, a number of cases where you have this ongoing machlokas between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shmuel. So number one case is Sotah. Vikines ishto. Rabbi Shmuel says rishus, which means if he wants to, he can, but it's not an obligation. Rabbi Akiva says obligation. And Rosa, this is incredible, because what Rabbi Akiva is saying is, if a man suspects his wife of being unfaithful, he has an obligation to begin the Sotah process to try to be mevar these circumstances. Next, la yitama. Rosa by the kahuna. So happens by the kahuna. The pasuk says that if the Kohen has an unmarried sister, that lamaise he is lo yitama, he should become tummy for her. Supposed to listen to this. Rishus to Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Shmuel says he has the license to become tummy for her, but he does not have the obligation. Rabbi Akiva Omer Chova. Rabbi Akiva says no, it's an obligation. He must become tummy for her. He must go to her levaya. The olam bahem tavodu. Similarly, the pasuk says you shall literally keep them in your service forever. This is referring to an Eved Kinani, a non-Jewish servant that I have. So the pasuk says, "Li'olam b'hem ta'avodu." I should keep them in my servitude forever. Rishus to Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Shmuel says this is an option. It's optional. Rabbi Akiva Omer Chova. Rabbi Akiva says no, it's an obligation. So Amalei Rabbi Papa Labai, Amalei Rabbi Shashi L'Rava. So Rabbi Papa said Labai. Others say it was Rabbi Shashi to Rava. Leima Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Akiva B'chalat Harakula Hachi Pligi. So we'll say it sounds like what? It sounds like Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva have this machlokas in Kol HaTorah Kula, meaning throughout the Torah, whenever there is a stated obligation, it would appear that Rabbi Shmuel holds Rishus, Rabbi Akiva holds Chova, to which the Gemara says To which the Gemara says, "Demar Amar Rishus Marachava." Amarle no. Hacha b'krai pligi. No, they're not arguing Kol Torah Kula. It happens to be in these cases of Sotah, Kahuna, and Evet Kanani, they're arguing about the interpretations of the Psukim. So the Gemara says like this. So now the Gemara is going to go through each of these. It's actually really interesting. So the Kines Ishto Divrei Rabbi Rishus Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Kiva Amar Chova. So my time to Rabbi Shmuel. So let's analyze these cases. So case number one is Sotah. So in the case of Sotah, man suspects his wife of adultery. Does he have to go ahead and warn her? Does he have to begin the process? Rabbi Shmuel says no, he doesn't have an obligation, he has the right. Rabbi Akiva says obligation. Says the Gemara, my time with Rabbi Shmuel. What's Rabbi Shmuel's logic? Savar la ki haitana. So Rabbi Shmuel holds like the following opinion. This Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer. Listen to this, we'll say, this is amazing. Klape sha'amra Torah. Lo sisna esachicha bilvavecha yachal kigon zu. So we'll say, watch this. So I might have thought, Torah says, I'm not allowed to hate my brother in my heart. I might have thought that applies to this case as well. What does that mean that applies to this case as well? Look at Rashi. Yachal af zekein. Rashi's a little bit of a different girsa. Rashi says, She'eres ishto veres al dasi hudis. Nisteres im shcheneha. Lo yikanila. So we'll say, I might have thought like this. Maybe again a man sees his wife engaging in what appears to be objectively inappropriate behavior. I might have thought to say like this. The Torah says, "Lo sisnas achicha b'vavecha." I may not despise my fellow in my heart, and therefore what? I have to let it go. I have to let it go. Therefore, again, Talmud Lomar v'avar alav ruach kina v'kina isishto. Therefore, the pasuk says Rabbi Shmuel, that's what the pasuk says. That no, the spirit of jealousy passes over him, and he can go ahead and warn his wife. Take a look at Rashi. Talmud Lomar v'kine im ratza lekani harashus biado. Umishum dilok sivkra hava amina da aser who the Rabbi Shmuel hacharishus. So let's listen to this. So Rabbi Shmuel says, what is the Torah telling me? I might have thought, had the Torah been silent, I might have thought that if a man sees his husband engaging in inappropriate behavior, he has a choice. What's the choice? Divorce her. That's the husband's side. Divorce her or let it go. Let it go. Don't harbor any animosity. Therefore, the pasuk of Rabbi Shmuel gives me the right to say to what? To begin the Sotah process. I have the right. Is it an obligation to Rabbi Shmuel? Not an obligation, but I have the right. Rabbi Akiva says 1 second. So that's Rabbi Shmuel. That's a rishus. Rabbi Akiva kinoi achrina ksiv. Rabbi Akiva will say about 1 second. The pasuk says va'avar alav ruach kina v'kina yesishto. It says kina twice. Therefore, again, Rabbi Akiva says the first kina, the first warning, right, means what? Is a reference to, takes care of lo sisnes achicha b'vavecha. That gives me the right to engage in the Sotah process. The second time the Torah says kina, teaches me that what? That it's an obligation. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Shmuel, Aidi deboy lemichtav hi nitma'a v'hi lo nitma'a ksiv nami v'kine esishto. We'll say, on the other hand, Rabbi Shmuel will say like this, that once the Torah went ahead and told me that this process can go forward, that the wife becomes asura, whether or not she actually committed adultery. I will say, remember, the novelty of the Sotah process is that once the woman is in violation of the warning, she becomes asura to her husband. Now we could see there is a way for him to ruin this entire process, and technically she becomes permitted to him again, but we'll get to that later. But technically speaking, once she violates the warning, lemaisa again, she becomes asura. That's a chiddush. So Rabbi Yishmael wants to say, since the Torah has to say that we don't know if she did become defiled or didn't become defiled, but yes, she's still asur. The pasuk has to once again restate that idea of v'kineis ishto. Because we'll say this is in line with the statement of Rabbi Shmuel, who says that what? The Tana de Rabbi Shmuel. Kol parsha shene'emar v'nishnis lo nishnis ela b'shil davar shenis chadish ba. Well, Rabbi Shmuel says that whenever you see something repeated in the Torah never repeats something for the sake of repetition. Rather, the Torah does what? The Torah repeats something in order to go ahead and be mechadish, introduce something new. Therefore, according to Rabbi Shmuel, he's going to say like this: the Torah is introducing to us the new concept that she becomes asura to her husband out of suffix. Therefore, the Torah chooses to repeat the same phraseology at the end of the pasuk that are repeated at the beginning of the pasuk in order to make the pasuk textually symmetrical. But because the Torah at the end of the pasuk introduces something new, therefore the Torah introduces the same text as well. But you can't dash in the second vikina, because you also understand what's happening over here. The fundamental machlokes between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shmuel really comes from the fact that there is two kinas. It says vikina la twice. He warns her twice. So Rabbi Akiva says the first kina is to teach me that Sotah is permissible. Why do I have to learn that Sotah is permissible? Because the Havamina is that I would have thought there's no process of Sotah. Why? Because again, I'm not allowed to take my fellow. So the process of Sotah engenders animosity. I might have thought it's usher. Therefore, again, the first kina teaches me that the process is permissible. Second, the kina according to Rabbi Akiva teaches me that what? That it's obligatory. According to Rabbi Shmuel, no. The second part of the pasuk, that second kina, is just there to preserve textual symmetry. Since the pasuk is coming to introduce a new concept, namely that she becomes asura to her husband even out of safek, that second vikina law is just to preserve the symmetry. You can't learn anything out of it. Therefore, Shitlas Rabbi Shmuel is that the Sotah process is a reshus and not a choba. Next case, la yitama, the Kohen's ability to become tummy for his sister, reshus. Rabbi Shmuel says he has the right to do so, but not an obligation. Rabbi Akiva says no, it's an obligation. My time, Rabbi Shmuel. What's Rabbi Shmuel's logic? Aidi dichsiv emar lakonim b'nei Aaron va'amarta aleim lenefesh lo yitama ba'amav. Since the pasuk says, say to the kohanim, the sons of Aaron, and say unto them, they shall not become defiled to any corpse. It's stricha lemichtav la yitama. The pasuk has to tell us that what? That the kohen is permitted to become tummy for a sister. But again, it's a reshus. Rabbi Kiva, michiim l'sheiro, nafka. So Rabbi Kiva says, but that's not true. The pasuk already says, l'sheiro hakarovei. The pasuk already says that the kohen is permitted to become tummy for his relatives. If that's the case, why don't he la'achoso? La yitama la'amali. So what does the phrase la yitama come to teach me? L'chova. Comes to teach me that it's not just an option for him to become tummy, rather what? There is an obligation. For Rabbi Shmuel will say, La mitama. Listen to this. So what does Rabbi Shmuel do with La yitama? What does he do with that phrase? So La yitama ve'in mitama leveiraha. He can only become tummy to the body of his sister, but not to her limbs. There's a halacha that says that if a person has an amputation, you must bury those limbs as well. The chiddush of the pasuk is a kohen could become tamei for the body of his sister, but not for her limbs. Rabbi Akiva would say, Imkain lichtov rachmana la v'lishtok yitama lamali. If that's the case, let the pasuk just say la. Why do you have to have the word yitama? The Gemara says shmamina. Therefore, again, it must be that yitam. Therefore, according to Rabbi Akiva, the yitama is coming to teach me that what? That there's an obligation for him to become tummy for his sister. For Rabbi Shmuel will say, I did the kasiv law, since the pasuk had to teach me law, and law teaches me that what, according to Rabbi Shmuel, that a kohen can't become tummy for the limbs of his sister. Kasav nami yitama. The pasuk also includes the word yitama. We're going to see this over and over, because remember, Rabbi Shmuel goes in accordance with the shita of Debei Rabbi Shmuel, who says, the Tana Debei Rabbi Shmuel, kol parsha shene'emra v'nishnis, any parsha that is written and repeated, lo nishnis ela b'shvil davar shenischadishma, was only written for something, ultimately some new idea that was included there. Next case, li'olam bahem ta'avodu. The pasuk says over here, again by Evet Kanani. Pasuk tells me again that I should keep them in my servitude forever. Rishus to Rabbi Shmuel says that's optional, meaning I don't have to. If I want to emancipate my servant, that is my option. But again, I have the option to keep them in my constant servitude. Rabbi Kiva Omer Chova. Rabbi Kiva says no, it's an obligation. So my time, Rabbi Shmuel. What's Rabbi Shmuel's logic? Meaning, what's his reason? Aidi dichsiv lo sechaya kol neshama. Listen to this. Since the pasuk says Rabosai, by what? By the Zayin Amim and by the 7 nations who were indigenous to Canaan, pasuk says I have to wipe them out. Therefore, the pasuk is necessary to teach me that I am permitted to go ahead and keep them in my servitude forever. The Mishri to teach me the following case: Echad mikala umos shabala knanis v'holid mimena ben. That if a man from another nation fathered a child with a Canaanite woman, and they had a son together, Sha'ata Rasha Liknoso. I am permitted to purchase that son, that offspring, as a servant. Tisanya, because we learned, how do I know that if one of the men from one of the foreign nations fathered a child with a Kinanis, that I am permitted to go ahead and purchase that child as an Eved? Talmud Lomar, because the pasuk says, "V'gam b'bnei atoshavim hagarim imachem mehem tiknu." Because it says, even from those resident strangers, right? Those Gentile nations, the Gentile toshavim, the Gentile residents, right? You are permitted to go ahead and purchase them. Remember again, you understand the competing issues over here. On one hand, the pasuk says, "Lo sechai kol neshama," I have to wipe out the 7 indigenous nations from Canaan. I have to get rid of them. And yet it's saying over here that I have the ability to take them as servants. So which one is it? So the Gemara is suggesting it refers to a case of a man from a foreign nation who fathers a child with a Canaanite woman. Torah is teaching me that I have the ability to go ahead and keep that offspring or use that offspring as a servant. Yochol ava Knani shebal achas mina umos v'holin mena ben shatar shegdos abevet. So Sotah might have thought that if a Canaanite man fathers a child with a woman from another nation, that I'm permitted to go ahead and take that child as a servant as well. Talmud Lomar, Asher holidu ba'artzachem. Therefore, the pasuk says you may only take of the children who are born in your land. Min hanolad ba'artzachem v'lo min agarim ba'artzachem. Only those who live in your land, born in your land, and not simply those who sojourn in your land. We'll say the assumption is that where does a couple ultimately end up? They end up in the wife's indigenous place of birth. So therefore, the Canaanite woman who has a child with another Gentile man, that child is again b'mnei toshavim. But let's say again, a Canaanite man who fathers a child with another woman, ultimately that's not b'mnei toshavim. Rabbi Akiva. Someone said this. She did Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Akiva. Memehem tiknu. Excuse me. Memehem tiknu nafka li'olam behem ta'avodu lamali. So Rabbi Akiva says, I can learn all of this out from the phrase mehem tiknu, purchase them among them. Why do I need the phrase li'olam behem ta'avodu lechova? Well, so according to Rabbi Akiva, that comes to teach me that what? That it's an obligation to keep my Gentile servant. Also, you're thinking to yourself, why would there ever be an obligation to keep my Gentile servant? We'll see in just a little bit why. Rabbi Yishmael, Fahem v'lo ba'achechem. Rabbi Yishmael says the olam bahem ta'avodu means that you should only give avodas parach, backbreaking labor, to your Gentile servants, but you should not give backbreaking labor to who? To your Eved Ivri, right? To your Jewish servant. Rabbi Akiva, ba'achechem miseifa dikra nafka. Rabbi Akiva says we learned that out from the latter part of the pasuk. Because what does the pasuk say? U'ba'achechem b'nei Yisrael ish ba'achiv lo sirda bo befarach. It says explicitly that for your brother, the Jewish servant, you shall not give him backbreaking labor. I understand. Somebody's got to do the backbreaking labor. What the pasuk is saying over here is have your Gentile servant do it. Do not have your Jewish servant do it. Rabbi Yishmael, Aidi dichsev u'ba'achechem ksiv nami bahem bahem. But Rabbi Yishmael holds that once the pasuk says ba'achechem, and according to Rabbi Yishmael, ba'achechem teaches me what? Ba'achechem teaches me that I can't give my Jewish servant back-breaking labor. Therefore, the pasuk also includes bahem. L'chidusanya debei Rabbi Yishmael, as we learned in the statement of Rabbi Yishmael, the time of Rabbi Yishmael, called parsha shene'emra v'nishnis, any parsha that was written and stated again, lo nishnis ela b'shvil davar sheneschadish ba, was only included again because of some novelty that was stated. So therefore, Rabbi say, halacha lemaisa, we see again these 3 fundamental disputes between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yishmael. In the case of Sotah, Rabbi Yishmael says if there's suspicion, there's a chi of a chov to trigger the Sotah process. Rabbi Yishmael says rishus. In the case of la yitama, Rabbi Akiva again says chova. Rabbi Yishmael says rishus. And in the case ultimately again of the olam bahem ta'avodu, Rabbi Akiva says chova. Rabbi Yishmael says rishus. So you should just know that the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch paskin in all 3 of these cases like Rabbi Akiva. That halacha lemaisa again in the case of Sotah, it's a chov to begin the process if the man suspects adultery. For the Kohen, it's a chov, an obligation for him to become tummy for his single sister. And the olam bahem ta'avodu, it's a chov to keep my Gentile servant. in servitude towards me. And again, interesting, the Sefer HaChinuch writes that the reason for that is because if I don't keep my Gentile servant in servitude, I'm going to end up having to give the back-breaking labor to my Jewish servant. Interesting. So the Sefer HaChinuch merges both these reasons together. We pass like Rabbi Akiva in all three of these cases. Amr Rav Chisda, Rabbi says the Gemara, an amazing statement. Amr Rav Chisda, Zenusa bevesa ki karya l'shumsha. Immorality in a home is like a worm in a sesame seed. So I'll say, so what does that mean? Just like the worm in the sesame seed rots the seed, so too again, immorality, of course, erodes the very pillars, foundation of the Rabbi said, now there's another chap with this also. The Maharsha points out that the way a worm in a sesame seed works, these must be very small worms, the worm gets inside the seed and rots the seed from the inside. So the rot begins on the inside out. So to immorality, again, even if it's hidden, ultimately begins to erode at the very spiritual and moral pillars of the home and destroys the home from the inside. Rav Chisda will say, this is amazing. Tukfa bebesa, anger in a home, kikarya l'shumshima, is like a worm in sesame seeds. I was going to say, same idea, how again, if there's too much anger, and again I will say, this is not just necessarily marital strife, this is just talking about angry people in a home. If a husband is angry, if a wife is angry, actually we'll see what it applies to. That lamaisa again, that also arose down from the inside. Now I will say, now the Gemara says something that is quite amazing. I want to stop the pause the recording for this for just a moment. The Gemara says, Idi v'idi be'isisa, aval begavra leslan ba. But this is only an issue when it's the woman who's immoral or the woman who's angry. But if it's the man, it's not a problem. Now I will say, let me explain it. That's what. Let's stop here for today. So let me just explain this for just a moment. If you take a look at Rashi says over here, Idi v'idi. Tukva uzenusa darminan de michareves asabayis. This idea that immorality and anger destroy the home. Be'isisa kisha isha mizana oka asanis. If the woman is committing adultery, or she is the one who's very angry, so that's what destroys a home. Lefi sha isha mis asekes bezinuneha ve'ena osemalachta v'lo mishameres beisa. Because if a woman is involved in adultery, she's not taking her responsibilities at home seriously. What is this saying? This is an incredible yisod. The Gemara, of course, is not saying that if the husband commits adultery, it's not a big deal. Of course, it's a big deal. First of all, again, it's also for a husband to commit adultery as well, right? Assuming he's having adultery with a married woman. And also, remember, there's another piece. We're going to see this more as we're going to talk about anger and the destructiveness of anger for everyone. What the Gemara is saying is an incredible yisod. A woman has the ability to hold the home together, even under the most adverse of circumstances. That is the strength of, I'll say the Jewish woman, maybe it applies to women, I don't know. But for the Jewish woman, the has the ability to hold the home together even when everything is mamish just going so severely downhill. A man does not have that ability. That's just, a man doesn't have that level of staying power. A man doesn't have that level of intuition. A man doesn't have that level of being a yisir to be able to do it. So the Gemara is saying is like this. If it's the man who's the problem in the marriage, with morality and with anger, a woman could find a way to still stabilize the ship. Now, lav dafka, she might not be able to fix the problem. The marriage might end. But she could stabilize things in a way that not everything falls apart. If it's, on the other hand, the woman who's engaging in these behaviors, pretty much the marriage is done because the man does not have the koach and the powers to be able to stabilize the ship under adverse circumstances. V'amar Rav Chisda, betchila, kodem shechatu Yisrael ha'is hashchina shari im kol echad ve'echad. But I was saying in the beginning, before Klal Yisrael sinned, so the Shekhinah rested with every single person. Because the pasuk said that Rebbe Shalom was walking literally in the midst of your camp with each of us. But once we sinned, this is referring specifically to Cheda Egel. Nistalka Shekhinah mehem. So the Shekhinah left us. God does not want to see some matter of erva, and He will leave you. So in the beginning, it was God walked in the midst of our camp, but then ultimately, when there was an ervas davar, some matter of immorality, the Ribbon Shalom left. But Rabbi Shmuel will say this is amazing, amazing Gemara. I have to tell you, we don't have time, but if we had time, I would say to you, I'll say it's a privilege. It's not just we get up and we think, all right, I'm learning. It is a privilege to be able to learn the Torah Kedosha. It is a privilege to be able to see these words. And we get to do it with coffee. That's the even better part. Mamish li'ela uli ela. A privilege to be able. Look what our beautiful Torah teaches us. Get ready. Anyone who does a mitzvah in this world, we'll say when I do a mitzvah in this world, you know what happens? After 120, when my neshama is hopefully making its way to Olam Haba, to the Olam Ha'emes, to the Beis Din Shalmala, you know who runs before me to the Beis Din Shalmala? My mitzvos. And my mitzvos begin to advocate on my behalf even before I reach judgment, even before I get there. My mitzvos go. Mikad Masa v'holechas from the Olam Haba. Shneimar v'holech lefanecha tzidkecha. But if chas v'shalom one goes ahead and commits an avera in this world, melafafto v'holeches lefanav liyom adin. So we'll say melafafto. First Rashi says Mikad Maso is Lifnei Misasa Machrezasal. Rashi actually says, even before I die, my mitzvos go up to Shamayim to advocate on my behalf, even before I die. On the other hand, if a person commits an Avera, then what happens? Milafafto, Karachto. We'll say Karachto means that literally my Averos wrap themselves around me. Milafafto v'holeches lefanav lifnei yom adin. Shne'emar yelaftu archos tracham ya'alu b'tohu v'yovedu. We'll say, you understand what that means, that lashon of Milafafto? Or I should say, the lashon of Milafafto means, you see, the issue is when we commit an Avera, so what happens? Why do we sin? So okay, you can say, Taiva, we sin because I think that I could commit an Avera without it changing me. That's the whole chab. You see, I think that I could do this, but I'm still a good person. Which is true, we are still a good person, even if I sin. I could do this, and it won't impact me. I could do this, like it's almost like I could do the act without having the act have an actual impact on me. The Gemara says, that's not how it works. When I sin, milafafto, koreches, sin becomes a part of who I am. It wraps itself around me. Rabbi Eliezer Omer Kshurlo Kekelev. Sin is like a stray dog. What happens? It's like the Yitzhar is like a stray dog. We'll say, what happens with the stray? You feed it once, and what happens? It's going to follow you everywhere. It's literally like a dog that is attached to you. Shene Emar, v'lo shama elea lishkov etzla. So Rabbi says by Yosef. Yosef did not listen to Eshes Potifar to sleep with her, lios ima. So to be with her. What does that mean? Why does it say to sleep with her and to be with her? Lishkov etzla ba'olam hazeh, v'lios ima li olam haba. Because Yosef HaTzadik understood that when you sin, Rabbi say, when we fall prey to our Yitzhar, to our taivas, it's not just the pshat that it impacts me now, it follows me. It's like the stray dog. It's milafafto, it's karachto, it stays with me. And Yosef understood that lishkov ima, if he was going to sleep with her in this world, then what? Lihios ima. He's going to be with her in olam haba as well. One more line. I'm sorry? Okay. So Tanan Hassam. So also we learned elsewhere. So Shahaya Bedin. So also remember again, what's also very exciting about this, and I'm sure you're feeling this as well. What's very exciting about this is also like the going back and forth. Like I got a ton of halacha. It's part of like a spiritual smorgasbord. You want a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and you get you don't have to choose. You get everything. So Tanan Hassam Shahaya Bedin. Uma Eidos Harishona She'ino Sarta Isra Olam Eda Miskayemes Bepachos Mishnayim Eidos Hachrona Shao Sarta Isra Olam Eino Din Shlo Tiskayim Bepachos Mishnayim. So also remember again, the pasuk says over here that I might have thought the following: when it comes to Eidos Harishona is the kinui, is the warning. If the warning which does not create Isra, does not create ongoing Isra, only could be upheld with two witnesses. Eidos ha'achrona shel sarta isra olam. Eino din shlo tiskayim b'pachos mishnayim. Then it goes that saying eidos ha'achrona. We'll say eidos ha'achrona in this context refers to what? Refers to tuma. So if stira, which does not go ahead and affect ongoing isra, requires two, then tuma, which does go ahead and create isra olam, should also require two. Talmud lomar ve'edein ba. Talmud lomar ve'edein ba kol she. Ve'edein ba kol sheyesh ba. Therefore, the pasuk says The pasuk says, "By tuma ve'ed ein ba." There is no testimony there. The Gemara, remember this goes out to yesterday's daf. Kol sheyishba. But if there is any level of testimony, even eid echad, that is effective by tuma. So we'll say. So again, it's a special novel ruling by tuma that tuma ultimately can be affected by eid echad, even though what? Even though kinui requires two eidim. We'll say. So we're going to stop over here. Again, we're stopping a little bit mid discussion. We'll say. So I'm actually thinking. Yeah, so tomorrow morning we are going to start at 5:45 because just we'll catch up. Just and I see him. Those are looks of excitement, and Chemi looks like he's about to faint. Musas Yisharim. 5:30. All right, you know what we're gonna do. So we're gonna make a pshara. I'm sorry. I know it's not the same though. All right, you know what we're gonna do. We're gonna start. I'm sorry. It is a long one. Yeah. What about 5:30? All right. I will say. So you know what we're going to do? We're going to start tomorrow 5:45. I'm going to record a Mesilas Yesharim, so it's going to be posted there. There'll be a Mesilas Yesharim shir. It'll be posted on the website, on the podcast. You'll get Mesilas Yesharim like that. You're right. We should have Mesilas Yesharim. I'm the Kabbalah the Musar. Thank you. And Emir Hashem will start the daf at 5:45 tomorrow.